The sun rose timidly behind the luxurious buildings of Beacon Hill in Boston, gradually illuminating the imposing Anderson mansion. The large stone walls, strategically positioned security cameras, and impeccably manicured garden conveyed the same message to occasional passers-by. Keep your distance. To neighbors, it was just another wealthy family home, but few knew of the true fortress that existed inside, not just physical, but especially emotional. Henry Anderson adjusted his navy blue tie in the mirror, meticulously checking every detail. So of his appearance. At 42, he maintained the athletic build of someone who religiously attended the gym 3 times a week, always at the same time. The grey hair at his temples gave him an air of authority that perfectly matched his reputation in the Boston courts. He was known as the Iceberg, cold, calculating, and above all unbeatable. He looked at his watch, 6:30 a.m. He followed his schedule with military precision. "Madison, Lily!" he called, knocking lightly on his daughter's bedroom doors. Time. To wake up, 7 minutes for the shower, 12 for breakfast. The 9-year-old girls woke almost simultaneously, as if programmed to respond to their father's call. Identical twins, both had their mother's almond-shaped brown eyes and their father's determined chin. The physical resemblance was obvious, but those who knew them well, and there were few, noticed subtle differences in personality. Madison was more observant, keeping thoughts to herself. Lily had a natural curiosity that, in the rare moments when she let her guard down, reminded Henry of Anna. Anna. 3 years had passed since the accident that took her away forever, but her name remained a point of tension in the house, rarely spoken. Her photographs remained in the same places, dusted daily by the cleaning staff, but it was as if there was a tacit agreement not to look directly at them. "Good morning, Daddy," the twins said, almost in unison, already dressed in their impeccable school uniforms, their brown hair tied in identical ponytails. Henry nodded with approval. The girls had learned well. No effusive hugs or exaggerated displays of affection. There were rules for everything, including emotions. "Has Vera arrived?" "Yet?" asked Lily, referring to the nanny who had been caring for them for 2 years after a rigorous selection process personally conducted by Henry. "Vera?" Henry hesitated, furrowing his brow. It wasn't in his plans to have to give that news. Vera was hospitalized last night, blood pressure problem. The girls exchanged glances but showed no visible concern. They had learned not to express emotions. "Who's going to stay with us today?" asked Madison, the more practical of the two. "I'm working on that," he replied, checking his watch again. It was a decisive Monday. He had a hearing at 10 a.m. that could define the course of a multi-million-dollar case involving one of the state's largest construction companies. The preparation had been exhaustive and he couldn't afford to miss it. He mentally went through all the alternatives. His mother, Mrs. Barbara, lived in Old Harbor, 2 hours away. His sister, Claudia, was at a conference in New York, and the rest of his social circle consisted of professional colleagues with whom he maintained strictly professional relationships. The intercom rang at 7:15 a.m., interrupting his train of thought. Henry answered with barely disguised irritation. "Anderson residence." "Good morning, sir," replied a female voice, calm and firm. "My name is Zelda Sullivan. I was sent by the agency to replace Vera." Henry frowned. "I didn't request any replacement." "Vera?" "Herself asked, sir. From the hospital she contacted the agency, concerned about the girls." "That's impossible. I have strict protocols for hiring staff. A process that takes weeks, not hours." "I understand, sir." The voice didn't lose its calm. "But Vera insisted that you would be having difficulties today. She said it was an emergency." Henry looked at his daughters, who were eating silently, at the kitchen table, and then at his watch. 7:20 a.m. Time was passing and he needed a solution. "Wait a moment," he said, and hung up the intercom. Quickly, he called the hospital. After a few minutes of agonizing waiting, he managed to speak with Vera, who confirmed she had contacted the agency. "Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Zelda is trustworthy. I worked with her before in another family. Please trust me, it's just for today until I get better." Henry hung up reluctantly and returned to the intercom. "I'll open the gate, but that doesn't mean you're hired." A few minutes later, a short woman, approximately 60 years old, with black skin and grey hair tied in a simple bun, crossed the stone path of the garden. She wore simple but impeccably clean and well-pressed clothes. She carried a worn leather bag and had a serene expression on her face that contrasted with the tension emanating from Henry. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she greeted, extending her hand. Henry greeted her quickly, leading her to his office, away from the girl's ears. "Mrs. Zelda, I don't know what Vera told you, but I need to make some things clear. My daughters follow a rigorous routine." "Here are the schedules," he said, handing her a meticulously organized folder. "Meals, school assignments, permitted time for recreational activities. Everything is detailed. There's no room for improvisation." The woman nodded, calmly leafing through the pages. "The driver will come to pick them up at 12:30 p.m. for the return from school. The snack is prepared in the refrigerator with instructions. The school's phone number, my cell phone, and my partner's are on the first page. He emphasized the word, any change or unforeseen event must be immediately communicated." "I understand perfectly, Mr. Anderson. There are cameras in all areas of the house except the bathrooms, of course. I will be monitoring remotely." Mrs. Zelda maintained a steady gaze, showing no discomfort. "And most importantly," Henry's voice became deeper, almost threatening, "don't touch my daughters. No hugs, head pats, or any kind of unnecessary physical contact. They're not used." It was at that moment that something changed in Mrs. Zelda's gaze. It wasn't anger or indignation, but a mixture of compassion and firmness that Henry wasn't accustomed to seeing. "Mr. Anderson," she said, in a voice that didn't rise but gained a surprising depth, "I've worked for over 40 years caring for children. I'll respect your rules about schedules and meals, but I need you to understand one thing. Children need touch. It's like water for plants. I won't force anything, but I also won't deny a hug if your daughters need it." Henry felt his face heat. "Back in my house, we follow my rules." "And I will follow them, sir," she replied with dignity. "But there are rules that weren't written by you. They were written by life, and those also need to be respected." A heavy silence hung between them. Henry wasn't accustomed to being confronted in that way, especially by someone he had just met. However, something in Mrs. Zelda's posture prevented him from simply dismissing her. Perhaps it was the time running out. It was already 7:40 a.m. Or perhaps it was something in her eyes which seemed to see beyond the surface. "Let's see how things work out for today," he finally said, looking at his watch. "My partner, Dr. Peter Mitchell, will stop by during the day to check how things are going." "He will be welcome," she replied with a slight smile. Henry called his daughters to say goodbye. The girls entered the office with controlled steps, their curious gazes fixed on the stranger. "Madison Lily, this is Mrs. Zelda. She will be with you today," replacing Vera. "Pleased to meet you," said Mrs. Zelda, making no move to approach them physically. The girls responded with mechanical politeness. Henry noticed that Lily seemed to want to say something more, but contained herself, following the protocol of behavior that had been established. "I'll be back in the late afternoon," he announced, picking up his document folder. "Behave." As he walked out the door, he cast a final warning look at Mrs. Zelda. She held his gaze with serenity, without defiance, but also without submission. There was something different about that woman, something he couldn't define. And for the first time in a long time, Henry Anderson left home with a feeling of uncertainty hovering over his perfectly controlled routine. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Henry could barely concentrate during the journey to the office. As the driver drove the car through the tree-lined streets of Beacon Hill toward downtown Boston, he obsessively checked the app connected to the mansion's security cameras. So far, everything seemed normal. The girls were having breakfast under Mrs. Zelda's watchful eye, who remained at a respectful distance exactly as he had instructed. He decided to call Peter, his partner and only true friend since their days at law school. "Peter, I need an urgent favor," he said as soon as his friend answered. "Good morning to you too, Henry," Peter replied, with his usual good humor that contrasted with his friend's seriousness. "Let me guess. Problems with the twins. Vera was hospitalized last night. High blood pressure." "Oh no, is she okay?" "She will be. The problem is that a replacement showed up this morning, a Mrs. Zelda. And that's bad because... I don't know her, Peter." Henry raised his voice, controlling himself immediately afterward. "You know how I am with the girls. I don't trust strangers." Peter sighed on. The other end of the line. He knew well his friend's protective obsession since the tragedy with Anna. "What do you want me to do? Should I stop by?" "Please, just to check if everything's okay. I have that important hearing at 10 a.m. and can't cancel." "Relax. I'll stop by your house before lunch." "But Henry, have you ever thought that maybe it's time to—" "To what?" Henry interrupted defensively. "To loosen the reins a bit. The girls are growing up." Henry didn't respond immediately. He knew his friend had good intentions, but no one really understood what it meant to lose Anna in such an abrupt, so inexplicable way. How could doctors explain a brain aneurysm in a 32-year-old, apparently healthy woman? How could he have prevented it? These questions tormented him in the rare moments when he allowed himself to think about the subject. "Just stop by, okay?" he said, ending the conversation. Upon arriving at the law firm of Anderson and Mitchell, on the 20th floor of a commercial building in the financial district, Henry was greeted with the usual deference by the employees. No one dared to interrupt his concentration in the hours preceding an important hearing. He locked himself in his office, reviewing documents and preparing arguments, but his mind kept going back home, to his daughters in the hands of a stranger. Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, the usual silence was beginning to be broken in a subtle way. Mrs. Zelda had accompanied the girls to the gate, where the driver was waiting to take them to school. After making sure they were well accommodated in the vehicle, she went back inside and began to carefully observe the environment. The house was impeccable, but cold. Everything in neutral tones, expensive and functional furniture, but without personality. On the walls, some family photographs, all in identical frames, perfectly aligned. In one of them, Henry smiled next to a beautiful woman with long hair and expressive eyes, Anna, no doubt, and the twins as babies. It was the only record in which Henry appeared truly happy. Zelda walked through the rooms, familiarizing herself with the house. In the girls' room, she noticed that, despite being spacious and well-equipped with books, educational games, and computers, there was little evidence of spontaneous play. No dolls with messy hair, drawings on the walls, or disorganized children's collections. Everything meticulously organized like a furniture catalogue. On Madison's bedside table, she found a small notebook hidden under the pillow. She hesitated for a moment, respecting the girl's privacy, but her intuition told her that something important was there. She opened it and found drawings, colorful landscapes, houses with flowery gardens, a family of 4 holding hands. On the last page, a phrase written in neat, childish handwriting, "I miss when Daddy used to smile." Mrs. Zelda carefully closed the notebook and returned it to its hiding place. She had already seen enough to understand that this house needed much more than someone to follow schedules and rules. Around 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. Peter Mitchell, a 40-year-old man with curly graying hair and round glasses, introduced himself with a friendly smile. "Good morning. I'm Peter, Henry's partner. He asked me to stop by to see if everything's okay." "Good morning, Dr. Peter. I'm Zelda." She invited him in with a welcoming gesture. "Would you like some coffee? I just made some." Peter accepted, surprised by the hospitality. At Henry's house, visits were rare and normally received with formality. "So how long have you been working as a nanny, Mrs. Zelda?" he asked as she served coffee in the kitchen. "Oh, my dear, I've lost count. More than 40 years. I started taking care of my employer's children when I was still a domestic worker, back in rural Massachusetts. Then I specialized. Life teaches you a lot about children when you're willing to listen." Peter observed her with growing curiosity. There was something magnetic about the presence of this simple woman. "And how are the girls? Have you noticed anything different?" Mrs. Zelda served hot coffee in a cup and sat across from him. I noticed a lot, Dr. Peter, but you didn't come here to listen to my observations, did you? You came to evaluate me at your friend's request. Peter laughed, disconcerted by her. Frankness, you're guilty. But now I'm genuinely curious. What did you notice? Those girls are dying of fear, not of the outside world as their father thinks. They're afraid of disappointing their father, of not being perfect, of feeling things they shouldn't feel. Peter nodded, thoughtful. He had always observed the contained behavior of his honorary nieces, but had never verbalized his concerns to Henry. They lost their mother very early, he justified. Henry just wants to protect them. I understand his pain, believe me, but protecting isn't the same as imprisoning. Those girls need space to be children, to miss their mother without guilt, to make a mess, and even to get hurt once in a while. Peter sipped his coffee, surprised by its quality. It was the best he'd had in years. Mrs. Zelda, how long have you known Henry? Since this morning around 7:30 a.m., she replied with a calm smile. And you've already formed such a firm opinion about the family. It's not an opinion, Dr. Peter. It's experience. I've seen many families broken by sadness. Some heal by letting air into the wounds. Others try to seal everything with cement and end up suffocating. The conversation was interrupted by the phone. It was Henry wanting to know if Peter had already stopped by the house. I'm here now, Peter replied. Everything's in order. The girls are at school, and Mrs. Zelda is serving me an exceptional coffee. Coffee? Henry's voice sounded surprised on the other end. Since when do you drink coffee at my house? Since someone offered to make some. Peter smiled at Zelda, who returned it with a discreet nod. And the cameras. Does she know she's being monitored? Henry, relax. I'll go back to the office in a few minutes. Is your hearing over? It's over. We won. As expected, I'll be there in the late afternoon. After hanging up, Peter observed Mrs. Zelda with new interest. You know, I think you might be exactly what this family needs. I'm not the one who will decide that, Doctor. It's them. I'm just here to help if they'll let me. At school, Madison and Lily participated in physical education class with their usual contained discipline. While the other children ran and shouted during dodgeball, the Anderson twins remained strategically positioned, avoiding drawing attention, but participating enough not to be reprimanded. During the break, they sat alone on a secluded bench, sharing the snack that had been prepared according to Henry's rigorous nutritional specifications. What do you think Mrs. Zelda is like? Asked Lily, who always initiated the riskier conversations. Madison shrugged, looking around to ensure no one was listening to them. Different from Vera, she doesn't seem afraid of Daddy. Did you notice how she looked at us? Straight in. The eyes as if she really wanted to see us. Don't get used to it, warned Madison, always more cautious. Daddy will probably send her away today. Lily sighed, nibbling at her apple cut into perfect cubes. I wish she would stay. Why? We don't even know her. I don't know. She reminded me of Grandma Nancy. Grandma Nancy was Anna's mother, who had remained close to her granddaughters until her passing, 2 years after her daughter. The few memories the girls had of her were of warmth, laps, and homemade cookies, things that had completely disappeared from their lives. The teacher called, indicating the end of the break. The twins carefully stored the snack containers in their backpacks and followed the class, resuming the exemplary posture that was expected of Dr. Henry Anderson's daughters. At 12:30 p.m., as scheduled, the driver dropped the girls off at home. Mrs. Zelda received them at the door, making no move, to hug them but with a warm smile that illuminated her wrinkled face. How was school today? She asked as she accompanied them inside. Normal, Madison replied automatically. We had physical education and math, added Lily, a bit more communicative. Are you going to stay until Daddy gets back? Yes, I'll stay. And I prepared something special for lunch. The girls exchanged surprised glances. Meals at home followed a fixed menu, established by a nutritionist and prepared by the cook, who came 3 times a week. Leftovers were organized in labeled containers for the days she wasn't there. Special how? Asked Madison with a hint of suspicion. Come see, invited Mrs. Zelda, guiding them to the kitchen. On the table, normally arranged with the formality of a restaurant, There was a colourful tablecloth with flower prints. The plates, instead, of white and sober, were decorated and arranged in a more relaxed manner. In the centre, a steaming dish exhaled a delicious aroma of homemade seasonings. "Fried chicken with cornbread," announced Mrs. Zelda with evident pride. "My grandmother's recipe from back in Deerfield." "But it's not on this week's menu," hesitated Madison, confused. "I know, but I thought we could surprise your father. Sometimes small changes do good." Lily approached, smelling the food, with obvious approval. "It smells like Grandma Nancy's food," she commented almost in a whisper. "Really?" Mrs. Zelda smiled, pulling out a chair for each one. "Then let's sit and eat. Afterward, you can tell me more about this Grandma Nancy." The girls obeyed, still hesitant. They observed as Mrs. Zelda served generous portions on their plates without the exact measurements they were accustomed to. When they finally tasted it, something extraordinary happened. They smiled. A genuine, spontaneous smile that illuminated their serious little faces. "It's delicious!" exclaimed Lily, momentarily abandoning her composure to savor another forkful. "The secret is in the golden garlic and the lemon," Mrs. Zelda confided, sitting with them. "My grandmother used to say that food made with love nourishes more than food made just with ingredients." During lunch, for the first time in a long time, the twins spoke more than strictly necessary. They talked about school, about the math teacher who wore enormous glasses, about the boy who always forgot his materials. Small everyday observations that they normally kept to themselves, fearful of being frivolous or talkative. After the meal, Mrs. Zelda suggested something even more unexpected. "How about going to the garden? The day is too beautiful to stay trapped inside." The mansion's garden was a beautiful space, with perfectly trimmed lawn, strategically positioned trees, and a small ornamental pond. However, it was rarely used by the girls, except for supervised reading sessions or occasional formal receptions. "Do what?" asked Madison, genuinely confused. "To play, of course," replied Mrs. Zelda, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're 9 years old. 9-year-old children need to run, jump, get a little dirty." The girls exchanged glances again, divided between the desire to accept the invitation and the fear of disobeying the implicit rules of the house. "Daddy always says we could get hurt out there," Madison argued. "And we could," agreed Mrs. Zelda, to the surprise of both. "But you know something? Sometimes small injuries teach us to be stronger, and I'll be there to take care of you if anything happens." After a moment of hesitation, Lily timidly extended her hand to Mrs. Zelda. "Will you keep an eye on the cameras? Daddy is always watching." Mrs. Zelda accepted the small hand in hers, with a gentle squeeze that conveyed security without imposing. "Proximity. I'll keep an eye on you, not on the cameras. And if your father is watching, he'll only see 2 girls having fun as they deserve." In that moment, something subtle began to change in the air of the Anderson mansion. It was as if a window had been opened after being closed for a long time, letting in a fresh breeze of possibilities. Henry Anderson checked his watch for the 3rd time in the last 10 minutes. It was 5:45 p.m., and he was still stuck in his office, finalizing the documents for the case he had just won. Beside him, Peter was organizing some papers, casting discreet glances at his friend. "Want me to go ahead?" asked Peter, breaking the silence. "I can stop by your house and check how things are going." Henry hesitated. Normally, he would refuse any offer of help, maintaining total control over his family routine. But something had been disturbing him since the morning. Perhaps the firmness in Mrs. Zelda's gaze, perhaps Peter's comment about the coffee, or perhaps the images he had seen on the security cameras during the day. He hadn't been able to monitor the house constantly due to the hearing, but in the brief moments when he checked his cell phone, he saw scenes that left him uncomfortably surprised. His daughters, always so contained, running through the garden, Lily laughing openly while spinning under the shade of a tree, Madison helping to set the table for lunch, small acts of normalcy that paradoxically seemed strange in his house. "No, thank you," he finally replied. "I'll go myself. I'm just finishing up here." When he finally arrived home, it was already past 6:30 p.m. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains that framed Boston's horizon, tinting the sky with orange hues. As he opened the door, he was greeted by an unusual smell, something homey and comforting that wasn't part of the mansion's aseptic routine. And then he heard it. Laughter. Not the contained and polite laughter that sometimes escaped from the girls, but genuine, spontaneous giggles. He followed the sound to the kitchen, where he found a scene that seemed to belong to another house, another family. Madison and Lily, with improvised aprons, were helping Mrs. Zelda prepare what appeared to be cornbread muffins. There was flour on the floor, on the girls' clothes, even on Lily's face, who was laughing as she tried to shape the dough. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice louder than he intended. The laughter ceased instantly. The girls straightened up, like soldiers at attention, their eyes wide in guilty expressions. Only Mrs. Zelda maintained her calm, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson," she greeted with tranquility. "We're preparing dinner. Homemade cornbread, muffins, and a vegetable soup. I don't recall authorizing this," he replied, trying to control his irritation. "Where's the dinner that the cook left prepared?" "In the refrigerator, untouched," replied Mrs. Zelda, unfazed. "I thought the girls could benefit from a practical activity. Cooking teaches mathematics, science, teamwork." "I decide what benefits my daughters," he interrupted dryly. "Madison, Lily, go clean up and change clothes now." The twins obeyed immediately, downcast, leaving the kitchen without looking back. When they were alone, Henry faced Mrs. Zelda with severity. "You clearly didn't understand how things work in this house." "I understood perfectly, Mr. Anderson," she replied without hesitation. "I understood that this is a house where two children live like miniature adults, repressing their nature, suffocating their joy, and holding in their pain." The words hit Henry like a slap. He felt his face heat up, a mixture of anger and something deeper, more painful, that he didn't want to acknowledge. "You don't have the right." "I have the right to be concerned about children who are under my care, even if temporarily," she interrupted him with a serene authority that disconcerted him. "You want to protect them, I know. But what exactly are you protecting them from? Life, laughter, missing someone?" Henry felt his throat tighten. No one had spoken to him that way since Anna. "You're dismissed," he said, regaining his composure. "You can leave now." To his surprise, Mrs. Zelda nodded without protest. She began to gather her things calmly, while Henry remained standing, as if expecting some resistance. "Before I go," she said, picking up her bag, "I'd like to give you something." From inside her bag, she pulled out a small notebook with a decorated cover. Henry immediately recognized it. It was Madison's diary, the one he pretended not to know existed, respecting his daughter's small secret. "This belongs to Madison," he said, irritated. "You had no right to take it." "I didn't take it. Madison gave it to me, asking me to show it to you. She doesn't have the courage to show it to you personally." Henry hesitated, overcome with doubt. Finally, he accepted the notebook but didn't open it. "Good night, Mr. Anderson." Mrs. Zelda said goodbye, walking toward the door. "The ingredients to finish dinner are all separated. It would be a shame to waste the girls' work." When she left, Henry remained in the kitchen, observing the unusual mess. Flour scattered, utensils out of place, cornbread muffin dough in irregular shapes on the counter. On any other day, he would have been horrified. Today, something prevented him from feeling the usual irritation. He looked at the notebook in his hands. Should he return it to Madison without looking, respecting her privacy? Or should he read it since his own daughter, through Mrs. Zelda, had asked? He decided to open it. The first pages contained drawings typical of a 9-year-old child, houses, flowers, animals. But as he progressed, he noticed a progression. The drawings became more elaborate, darker. A house with closed windows, a girl alone in a room, faceless figures, until he came to a drawing that made his heart ache. A woman with long hair, surrounded by a kind of golden aura, waving from a distance to two crying girls. Next to it written in Madison's careful handwriting, "Mommy watches. Us from heaven, but Daddy doesn't let us talk about her." Henry sat heavily in a chair, feeling the weight of those words. He continued flipping through the notebook and found more phrases that hit him like arrows. "I wish I could hug Daddy, but he doesn't like it. I dreamed about Mommy today, but I can't tell anyone. Why is it wrong to cry when I'm sad?" The last entry, dated that very day, simply said, "Today I truly laughed." Henry closed the notebook, feeling something hot and moist running down his face. It took him a few seconds to realize they were tears, the first since Anna's funeral 3 years ago. The sound of timid footsteps brought him back to reality. Madison and Lily were at the kitchen door, already bathed and with changed clothes, looking at him with apprehension. "Daddy," called Lily hesitantly, "we're hungry." Henry quickly wiped away the tears, tucking the notebook into his jacket pocket. Let's finish dinner," he said with a voice that didn't seem like his own. "Can you teach me how Mrs. Zelda was doing it?" The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "But what about the food in the refrigerator?" asked Madison cautiously. "I think we can leave it for tomorrow." The twins approached slowly, still wary of the sudden change. Henry stood up and, in an impulse he couldn't explain, extended his arms to his daughters. It was an awkward gesture, almost forgotten, but the girls didn't hesitate. They ran to him, hugging him around the waist, squeezing him as if they feared he might change his mind. That hug awakened something that Henry had buried along with Anna, the ability to feel, to touch, to allow himself to be vulnerable. For a moment, they stayed like that in silence, as if trying to recover 3 years of lost hugs. "Is Mrs. Zelda gone?" asked Lily finally. "Yes," replied Henry, gently pulling away to look into his daughter's eyes. I think I was a bit hard on her." "Will she come back tomorrow?" insisted the girl with hope in her voice. Henry hesitated. His automatic response would be a resolute no, but Madison's notebook weighed in his pocket, reminding him of how much he had failed to notice his daughter's silent pain. "We'll see," he replied, surprising himself. "Now shall we finish these cornbread muffins?" During the following hour, Henry tried clumsily to follow his daughter's instructions on how to shape the dough. The result was cornbread muffins of bizarre shapes. That, to his surprise, made the girls laugh again. And this time he didn't reprimand them. They had dinner right there in the kitchen, something that never happened. The rule was always to use the dining room, with the table formally set. But that night, exceptionally, the rules seemed less important. During dinner, Lily casually mentioned her mother, something about how Anna loved warm cornbread. Henry felt his body stiffen reflexively, but forced himself to relax. "It's true," he said with a hoarse voice. "She always said that a true American has to know how to make good cornbread." The girls' eyes shone upon hearing their father speak, openly about their mother. "What else did she like to eat?" asked Madison timidly. Henry felt his throat tighten again, but he continued. "Pistachio ice cream, beef stew, and that apple pie with cheese that Grandma Nancy used to make." "I remember the apple pie," exclaimed Lily, excited. "Grandma Nancy always brought it when she came to visit us." The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, with memories of Anna emerging naturally. Henry realized with a pang of guilt how much he had deprived his daughters of those memories in the misguided attempt to protect them from pain. Later, when he put them to bed, another ritual that he had delegated to nannies in recent years, Henry sat on the edge of Madison's bed. "I saw your drawings," he said gently. "They're very beautiful." The girl lowered her eyes, suddenly tense. "Don't be angry with me for showing them to Daddy," pleaded Lily from the bed next to her. "Mrs. Zelda said it would be good for all 3 of us." "I'm not angry," assured Madison, still not looking at her father. "Just afraid." "Afraid of what, sweetheart?" asked Henry, feeling his heart clench. "That you'll be sad or angry because we talk about Mommy." Henry felt as if something broke inside him. He knelt between his daughters' beds, holding one hand of each. "Never be afraid to talk about your mother," he said with a choked voice. "Anna, Mommy, was the most important person in my life, along with you two. And it was wrong of me to try to pretend she never existed just because—" His voice faltered. just because it hurts too much to remember. Sometimes I forget what her face looked like, confessed Lily, with tears in her eyes. In the photos. It's different. Me too, admitted Madison, and that makes me sad. Henry took a deep breath, trying to control his own emotion. Tomorrow, he said after a moment, we're going to take the photo albums out of the closet. There are many photos you've never seen. Of Mommy as a child, of our trip to Cape Cod, of the day you were born. The girl's eyes lit up. Promise? Asked Madison, hopeful. I promise. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Henry sat in his office with a glass of whiskey, something he hadn't done in a long time. He looked at the phone several times, thinking about calling the agency and asking for Mrs. Zelda's contact. He still felt irritated by the way she had challenged his rules, invaded his space. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the positive impact she had had in just one day. He picked up the phone and called Peter. Are you still awake? He asked when his friend answered. I am. Did something happen? Henry hesitated, taking a sip of his drink. Remember when you said I should loosen the reins? I remember, replied Peter cautiously. Why? I think you were right, admitted Henry, feeling the weight of those words. And I think I need help. On the other end of the line, Peter smiled. It was the first time in 3 years that he heard his friend admit a weakness. I'm here for whatever you need, my friend. I always have been. Henry thanked him and hung up, feeling simultaneously exhausted and strangely light. He looked at Anna's photo that he kept on his desk, the only one he allowed in his personal space, and whispered, I think I messed everything up, my love, but I'll fix it, I promise. That night, Henry slept without the help of the pills that had accompanied him since the accident. His sleep was restless, populated by intense dreams in which Anna smiled, waved from a distance, but not with sadness, with approval. As if saying, finally, Henry, finally, you're coming back. The next morning, even before the alarm clock went off, Henry was already decided. He would call the agency as soon as it opened. Mrs. Zelda needed to come back, not just for the girls, but for him too. Because, for the first time in 3 years, he felt that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path to move forward without betraying Anna's memory. A path that included hugs, laughter, cornbread muffins of strange shapes, and above all, permission to feel. The agency took time to locate Mrs. Zelda. Apparently she wasn't in their regular registry. She had been a personal recommendation from Vera, who knew her work in another family. When they finally got her contact, it was almost noon. Henry, who had cancelled all his morning appointments, something unprecedented in his career, felt a growing anxiety. Mr. Anderson? Mrs. Zelda's voice sounded calm on the other end of the line, without any trace of resentment for how she had been dismissed the night before. Mrs. Zelda, Henry hesitated, unaccustomed to apologizing. I would like to know if you could come back, to take care of the girls. There was a brief silence before the response. May I ask what has changed? Since yesterday? The question caught him off guard. He expected her to simply accept, perhaps even show gratitude for the new opportunity, but there she was again, challenging him to look inward. I read Madison's notebook, he finally admitted, and I realized that maybe I'm not being the father my daughters need. I see, she replied with a softness that contrasted with her usual firmness. And what do you expect from me exactly? Henry frowned, confused. I expect you to take care of my daughters, of course. No, Mr. Anderson. What do you really expect? For me to be a nanny who follows your rules? Or for me to help your daughters reconnect with their emotions? Those are different things. Henry felt his face heat up. That woman had the gift of completely disarming him. I don't know. Exactly, he confessed, surprising himself with the honesty. I just know that they smiled yesterday, really smiled, and they talked about their mother without fear. That hasn't happened in a long time. Another silence, longer this time. I'll be there in an hour, Mrs. Zelda finally said, but I have one condition. Condition? Yes, you need to be present. Not just physically in the same house, really present, participating, learning. This isn't a job just for me, Mr. Anderson. It's a job for both of us. Henry felt a mixture of indignation and surprise. Never in his entire professional life had anyone imposed conditions on him. "Are you negotiating with me?" he asked, with a slight tone of incredulity. "I'm laying my cards on the table," she replied, without hesitation. "I'm not just a nanny. I'm a person who cares about those girls' well-being, and they need their father back." Henry was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the impact of those words. Finally, he replied with a softer voice than he intended. "1 hour then. I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Henry remained seated in his office, contemplating the strange turnaround in his meticulously ordered life. If someone had told him 2 days ago that he would be cancelling professional commitments to wait for a nanny he had just met, he would have laughed at the absurdity of the idea. The phone rang again. It was Peter. "So, did you speak with the miraculous lady?" "I did," replied Henry, still absorbed in his thoughts. "She's coming in an hour." "Great, and how are the girls today?" "Good. Excited about the idea of seeing old photos of Anna." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," Peter finally said. "That's big, Henry. How long has it been since you looked at those albums?" "Since the funeral." Peter knew his friend well enough to know what that represented. After Anna's departure, Henry had meticulously stored all the photo albums in sealed boxes in the attic, as if he could also box up the pain they represented. "Want me to come over? For moral support?" "No need," replied Henry, surprised at himself. "I think this is something I need to do alone, I mean with the girls. I understand, but call me if you need to, okay?" Henry thanked him and hung up. Then, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went up to the attic. The space was impeccably organized like the rest of the house, but covered with a fine layer of dust that evidenced the lack of use. In a corner, he identified the boxes he was looking for, all labeled with Anna's neat handwriting: wedding, honeymoon, pregnancy, twins' early years. He carefully carried them downstairs, feeling the physical and emotional weight of those memories. He deposited them in the living room but didn't have the courage to open them immediately. Something about those sealed boxes represented a barrier that he himself had built, between the past and the present, between pain and healing. At 1 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Zelda was back, with her worn leather bag and a small additional peg. She wore simple clothes but different from the day before, a long printed skirt and a blue linen blouse that gave her a dignity devoid of pretension. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she greeted with a slight smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Zelda. Please come in." She entered, discreetly observing the environment. Her gaze stopped on the boxes stacked in the living room. "I see you've already started," she commented with approval in her voice. "The girls haven't seen them yet. They're at school. They'll be back at 12:30 p.m. "Good. So we have time to talk." Henry led her to the kitchen where he offered coffee, something he would never normally do as he considered that employees should maintain an appropriate distance. "Before the girls arrive, I need to better understand what happened." "Yesterday," he said as he served 2 cups. "How did you connect with them so quickly?" Mrs. Zelda accepted the coffee with a silent thanks, observing Henry with attention. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Mr. Anderson. I just allowed them to be children. I listened. I didn't judge. I offered space for them to feel what they need to feel." "But they barely knew you. How did they trust you so easily?" Mrs. Zelda smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. "Children have a natural sensor for people. They know who really cares and who just pretends. I care, Mr. Anderson. I've always cared about the children who've crossed my path." Henry nodded, thoughtful. "Do you have children?" A slight shadow passed through Mrs. Zelda's eyes. "I had a son, Joshua. I lost him to fever when he was 6 years old." Henry felt a tightness in his chest. Here was a woman who knew the pain he felt perhaps even more deeply. "I'm sorry," he said with sincerity. "I didn't know. It was many years ago, at a time when we didn't have access to good doctors in rural areas." She paused, looking out the window. "After that, I dedicated my life to caring for other children, perhaps as a way to keep Joshua alive somehow? The silence that followed had a different quality. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the respectful silence of someone who recognizes shared pain. "How did you move forward?" Henry asked finally. Mrs. Zelda looked back at him with an expression that mixed compassion and firmness. "You don't move forward after losing a child, Mr. Anderson, or a wife. We learn to carry the absence. At first, it's a weight that seems impossible to bear. With time, it doesn't get lighter, but we get stronger, and we learn that the best way to honor those who departed is to live fully." The words hit Henry like a ray of clarity amid the fog of grief in which he had been living for 3 years. "Anna," he began, feeling his throat tighten, "was the most joyful person I've ever known. She lived intensely. When she discovered the pregnancy, she was radiant. She said we would have a house full of laughter." He paused, feeling tears threaten to emerge. "And look what I did with her dream. I turned our house into a mausoleum." "It's not too late to change that," said Mrs. Zelda gently. "Your daughters are still children. Children have an incredible capacity for healing when they receive the love and permission they need." Henry looked at his hands, ashamed. "I don't know if I know how to do that. That's why I'm here," she replied with an encouraging smile, "to help all 3 of you relearn, together." The sound of the electronic gate interrupted the conversation. The girls were arriving from school. When Madison and Lily entered, their faces lit up seeing Mrs. Zelda sitting at the kitchen table with their father. There was a moment of hesitation. 3 years of conditioning had taught them to contain demonstrations of enthusiasm. But soon, Lily, always the more spontaneous one, ran to hug the lady. "You came back," she exclaimed with genuine joy. Mrs. Zelda returned the hug naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I came back, dear. Your father invited me." Madison approached more slowly, but her smile was equally radiant. She looked at her father, seeking confirmation. "Is Mrs. Zelda going to stay with us now?" she asked hopefully. Henry felt something move inside him upon seeing the joy in his daughter's eyes. "Yes, at least for now," he replied, trying to sound casual, despite the emotion he felt. "And I have a surprise for you." The girl's eyes widened when he mentioned the boxes in the living room. They followed him with expectation, and when they saw the photo albums being removed from the boxes, they exchanged looks of astonishment. "Are these Mommy's photos?" asked Lily, almost whispering. "They are," confirmed Henry, opening the first album. "I thought we could look at them together." For the next 2 hours, seated on the living room carpet, Henry, Madison, and Lily immersed themselves in a past that had been sealed for so long. Mrs. Zelda remained discreetly present, preparing a light snack that she brought to them without interrupting the moment of family intimacy. Henry showed his daughters photos they had never seen. Anna as a teenager, with her long hair blowing in the wind at Cape Cod Beach. Their first date recorded by a friend at a cafe in downtown Boston. Their wedding day, with Anna resplendent in her simple but elegant dress. "Mommy was so beautiful," commented Madison, gently touching a photo. "She was beautiful," agreed Henry, feeling his throat tighten. "And you two look a lot like her." The girls smiled, proud. They continued flipping through the albums, arriving at the pregnancy photos. "Wow, her belly was huge," exclaimed Lily, laughing at the image of Anna. "In the last months of pregnancy." "There were 2 of you in there," explained Henry, smiling at the memory. "She complained that you kicked at the same time, as if you were playing soccer." The laughter flowed naturally, mixed with moments of emotion when they found particularly significant photos. Henry was surprised to realize how good it was to talk about Anna, not with the searing pain of the early days, but with a sweet, almost comforting longing. At one point, Lily asked a question that caught Henry off guard. "Daddy, why do we never talk about the day Mommy went away?" Silence fell heavily. Henry felt his body stiffen, the automatic reflex to change the subject to protect the girls and himself from that specific pain. But then he noticed Mrs. Zelda's gaze, who had returned to the room at that moment. It wasn't a look of judgment, but of silent encouragement. "Because," he began, choosing his words carefully, "because it hurts a lot to remember that day, for me especially." "But how will we know what happened if no one tells us?" insisted Madison, with a child's impeccable logic. Henry took a deep breath, looking at his daughters. They deserved to know. Not all the details, perhaps, but enough to understand. "Mommy had a sudden problem in her brain," he explained, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "She was here at home, reading a book to you, when she felt a very strong pain in her head. I rushed her to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her." "Did she suffer?" asked Lily with tearful eyes. "No, sweetheart. It was very quick, and she was surrounded by doctors who did everything they could." "Did she say anything before she left?" Madison had her eyes fixed on her father's, as if seeking an essential truth. Henry felt the tears finally escaping, without trying to contain them this time. "She did. She asked me to tell you that she loved you more than anything in the world, and for me to—" his voice faltered, "to take good care of you." The girls approached, one on each side, and spontaneously hugged him. It was a tight hug, loaded with years of contained emotions, of unasked questions, of unshed tears. Henry enveloped them with his arms, feeling the warmth of his daughters, realizing, perhaps for the first time, how much they had grown while he was busy building walls. "I'm sorry," he whispered through tears. "I'm sorry for not letting you talk about her, for not having been the father you deserved." "It's okay, Daddy," consoled Lily, caressing his face with her small hand. "Now you're here." From that triple hug emerged something new, something that Henry had forgotten existed. Hope. A small spark, still fragile, but real. The hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path to rebuild what had been broken. Mrs. Zelda observed the scene from the door with a serene smile. She wasn't just a nanny witnessing a family moment. She was someone who recognized the silent miracle of a heart beginning to open after being closed for so long. "I think this family deserves a special celebration," she finally said, approaching the group. "How about we all go for ice cream?" "Ice cream?" asked Madison, surprised by the unusual suggestion in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. "Yes, ice cream," confirmed Mrs. Zelda, with a mischievous sparkle in her eye. "Pistachio, perhaps?" "I heard it was a certain very special person's favorite." Henry looked at her, amazed by her memory and sensitivity. "Pistachio ice cream," he repeated, feeling a genuine smile form on his lips. Anna would be happy with the idea. And so, on that unexpected afternoon, the Anderson family went out together for the first time in 3 years for something that wasn't a school obligation or a medical appointment, simply to enjoy a moment, to celebrate a memory, to feel, without fear, without guilt, just feel. That night, after all the guests had left, Henry sat on the porch with a glass of wine, contemplating Boston's starry sky. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful, comfortable, occasionally broken by the soft sounds of the girls sleeping. He took a photograph of Anna that he now always kept nearby, no longer hidden, no longer too painful to look at, but an integrated part of his life. "I think we're doing well, my love," he whispered to the image of his smiling wife. "It's not perfect. It never will be without you. But we're finding our way." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves in the garden, bringing the delicate fragrance of the jasmine that was beginning to bloom. Henry breathed deeply, allowing himself to fully feel the longing that would never completely disappear, but also the gratitude for the present, the hope for the future. The fortress he had built after losing Anna had transformed. It was no longer a prison of rigid rules and constant fear, but a home, imperfect, sometimes messy, but full of love. A place where 2 girls could grow up knowing they were unconditionally loved. A place where a man broken by loss could finally begin to rebuild himself. And all this because of a Monday morning when the intercom rang and a serene voice announced, My name is Zelda Sullivan. I was sent by the agency to replace Vera. Some people enter our lives briefly, but leave eternal marks. Like stones thrown into a lake, their waves continue to expand long after they have disappeared from view. Mrs. Zelda was one of those people. An angel without wings, a silent messenger, a master in the art of healing hearts. And the Anderson family, once fragmented by pain, now moved forward united, not perfect, not without scars, but complete in their own way. Together, they discovered that the opposite of grief isn't instant joy, but the ability to move forward, carrying the memory of those who departed not as a burden, but as a light. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to the Anderson family. The pace was still organized. Henry wouldn't abandon his methodical nature overnight, but there was a flexibility that didn't exist before. The girls began to demonstrate their personalities with more freedom. Madison revealed herself to be a voracious reader, spending hours absorbed in adventure books, while Lily discovered a passion for drawing, covering sheet after sheet with vivid colors that contrasted with the neutral tones of the mansion. Mrs. Zelda remained firm in her initial condition. Henry needed to be present, and to everyone's surprise, especially Peter's, he was really trying. He arrived earlier from the office, participated in dinner every night, and on weekends took the girls on small outings to City Park, Central Market, the Museum of Arts and Crafts, places that Anna had loved and that had been banished from their lives after her departure. On one of those Saturday mornings, while preparing breakfast, another novelty since before this task was exclusively the nannies or the cooks, Henry received a call from his mother, Mrs. Barbara. "Henry, I'm calling to confirm the arrival time," she said, with her always energetic voice. "Arrival?" Henry frowned, confused. "Don't tell me you forgot. We arranged months ago that I would come spend 2 weeks with you during the girls' school vacation. I arrive tomorrow at 4 p.m. Henry felt a wave of anxiety. Indeed, they had arranged it, but that was before everything changed. His mother, Barbara Anderson, was a strong and determined woman, widowed for decades, who managed with an iron hand the small inn she had inherited from her husband in Old Harbor. Her relationship with her son was marked by genuine love, but also by constant friction due to equally strong personalities. After Anna's departure, the situation became even more complicated. Barbara strongly disagreed with the way Henry raised his granddaughters. She considered him excessively controlling and emotionally distant. The discussions became so intense that in the last 2 years, visits had become rare and brief. "Of course, Mom, we'll be waiting," he replied, trying to sound natural. "Great, and Henry, dear, I hope you've improved that habit of controlling everything. The girls need a grandmother who can spoil them a bit." Henry rolled his eyes, but kept his voice controlled. "We'll see, Mom. See you tomorrow." Upon hanging up, he found Mrs. Zelda's curious gaze, who was preparing pancake batter in silence. "My mother," he explained with a sigh. "She's coming to spend 2 weeks with us. She arrives tomorrow. Mrs. Barbara, isn't it? The girls speak of her with affection. Yes, they adore her. It's her relationship with me that's complicated." Mrs. Zelda nodded without asking more. She didn't need to. In her weeks in the house, she had learned to read the silences of the Anderson family as well as their words. When the girls came down for breakfast, they received the news of their grandmother's visit with evident enthusiasm. "Grandma's coming," exclaimed Lily, almost jumping with joy. "Will she bring those cinnamon cookies? And will she tell stories about Daddy when he was little?" added Madison, equally excited. Henry smiled despite the apprehension. It was good to see his daughters genuinely happy about something. "Yes" to both questions. "She arrives tomorrow and will stay until the end of school vacation." The girls exchanged complicit looks as if sharing a delicious secret. Henry knew those looks well. They meant they were planning something. "What are you two plotting?" he asked in a light tone. "Nothing, Daddy," replied Madison too quickly to be convincing. "We're just happy," added Lily, with her best innocent smile. Henry decided not to insist. The fact that his daughters felt safe enough to have small Secrets was already a significant progress. On Sunday, the house was meticulously prepared for Mrs. Barbara's arrival. The girls insisted on decorating the guest room with drawings made especially for their grandmother. Henry, after some hesitation, allowed them to place fresh flowers in all rooms, something that Anna used to do and that he had forbidden after her departure, unable to bear the memory. At 4 p.m. sharp, punctuality was a trait of the Anderson family after all, the car bringing Mrs. Barbara parked in front of the mansion. Even before the driver opened the door, the girls were already running through the garden, eager to receive their grandmother. Barbara Anderson was a 68-year-old woman who appeared much younger, tall, erect, with grey hair elegantly cut in a classic bob. She maintained the impeccable posture of someone who had spent her entire life being observed. She dressed with the sophisticated simplicity typical of New England matriarchs, a navy blue linen suit, discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, and the characteristic lavender perfume she had worn since Henry could remember. "My princesses," she exclaimed, opening her arms to receive her granddaughters in an effusive hug. "How you've grown, you're beautiful." The girls hugged her with genuine enthusiasm, talking at the same time about everything they wanted to show, tell, do with their grandmother during her stay. Henry approached more slowly, mentally preparing himself for the encounter. Barbara, after releasing her granddaughters, turned to her son with an evaluating look. "Henry," she greeted with a formal kiss on the cheek. "You seem different." "Different how, Mum?" he asked, helping her with her handbag. "I'm not sure, less tense perhaps." She frowned, as if analyzing a painting for imperfections. "We'll see." As they entered the house, Barbara stopped abruptly, observing the environment with wide eyes. "What happened here?" she asked, in a tone of astonishment. Henry followed, her gaze trying to understand what had surprised her so much. The house was impeccably clean and organized, as always. But then he realized it was the small details. Lily's drawings hung on the refrigerator, Madison's books scattered on the living room sofa, the flowers in colorful vases, Anna's photographs, previously restricted to specific locations, now present in various areas. "We made some changes," he replied, trying to sound casual. "Changes?" Barbara arched a perfectly delineated eyebrow. "It seems more like someone finally allowed people to live in this house." Before Henry could respond, Mrs. Zelda emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Good afternoon," she greeted, with her serene smile. "How you must be Mrs. Barbara. The girls have talked a lot about you." Barbara turned to the newcomer, evaluating her with the same penetrating gaze she had dedicated to her son. "And you are?" "Zelda Sullivan. I've been working here for a few weeks taking care of the girls." "Ah, another nanny?" Barbara turned to her son. "I thought you were more selective with your staff, Henry." The comment, loaded with poorly disguised prejudice, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Henry felt his face heat up, divided between the old habit of agreeing with his mother and the new impulse to defend Mrs. Zelda. "Mrs. Zelda is not just a nanny, Mum," he replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "She has been fundamental for us." Barbara raised her eyebrows, visibly surprised by her son's response. "Interesting," she murmured, turning to her granddaughters. "Well, girls, how about showing me what you prepared for Grandma?" The twins, oblivious to the tension between the adults, pulled their grandmother by the hands, eager to show the drawings and small surprises they had prepared. As they climbed the stairs, Barbara cast a final intrigued look at Mrs. Zelda and her son. "I'm sorry for my mother's comment," said Henry when they were alone. "She can be difficult." "Don't worry, Mr. Anderson," replied Mrs. Zelda with tranquility. "I've faced much more difficult types in life. Your mother is just protecting what she considers hers." "What do you mean?" "She sees the girls as her responsibility too, and probably worries about you, although she may not know how to show it, in the best way." Henry nodded, thoughtful. He had never considered his mother's controlling actions from that perspective. Barbara's arrival brought a different energy to the house. The girls flourished under their grandmother's attention, who, despite all her flaws, knew how to make them feel special. She told stories of Henry as a child, prepared old family recipes, brought carefully chosen gifts for each one. However, the harmony lasted briefly. Already on the second day, during dinner, the first spark was lit. "Henry, dear," began Barbara, using the sweet tone that always preceded some criticism, "don't you think Madison is reading too much? Children need fresh air, need to play. This girl will end up needing glasses before she's 10. Madison shrunk slightly in her chair. The enthusiasm for the new book she had received from her grandmother suddenly diminished. "Madison has been reading what she likes, Mom," replied Henry, keeping his voice controlled. "And we've been balancing it with other activities." Barbara didn't seem convinced. "And what about you, Lily? Still having that problem with math? Your father was just the same, you know. I had to hire private tutors for years." It was Lily's turn to blush, embarrassed to have her difficulties exposed. "Lily has been trying very hard," intervened Mrs. Zelda, who was participating in the meal at Henry's request, "and has made notable progress." Barbara turned to her with an icy smile. "Excuse me, but I don't recall asking for your opinion about my granddaughter." A tense silence fell over the table. The girls looked from one adult to another, clearly uncomfortable. Henry felt the familiar impulse to simply agree with his mother to avoid conflict, but then he noticed Lily's hurt expression. "Mrs. Zelda is right, Mum," he said, surprising everyone, including himself. "Lily has been very dedicated, and we're proud of her progress." Barbara narrowed her eyes, evaluating her son as if seeing him for the first time. "Since when do you defend employees against your own mother, Henry?" "I'm not defending anyone against anyone, Mum. I'm just stating a fact, and I would like you to respect Mrs. Zelda, who has been a very important presence for our family." The words "our family" hung in the air, loaded with meaning. For years, after Anna's departure, Henry had referred to himself and his daughters as the girls and I, never as a family unit. Barbara noticed the subtle change, and her eyes narrowed even more. "I see," she finally said, with a tone that suggested she understood much more than had been said. "Well, who am I to interfere, right? Just the grandmother." The rest of the dinner proceeded in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the girls' attempts to ease the tension with comments about the food or innocent questions. Later, after the girls were put to bed, Barbara confronted her son in the library, away from Mrs. Zelda's ears, who was organizing the kitchen. "What's going on here, Henry?" she asked without preamble. "You're completely different. The house is different. The girls are different." "Different how, Mom?" Henry feigned innocence, although he knew exactly what she was referring to. "Don't play dumb. You know what I'm talking about. For 3 years you kept this house as a mausoleum for Anna. You controlled every movement of those girls as if they were porcelain dolls. You pushed away everyone who tried to help, including me." She paused, narrowing her eyes. "And now suddenly, there are flowers around the house, drawings on the refrigerator, and you're defending an employee you barely know." Henry took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of irritation and guilt. His mother was right about many things, but her accusatory tone awakened in him the old defensive instinct. "We're trying to move forward, Mum. Isn't that what you always wanted?" "Moving forward is one thing, Henry. Replacing Anna is something completely different." Henry felt as if he had been slapped. "Replace? What are you talking about? This woman, this Zelda, she's clearly assuming a maternal role in this house. The girls adore her. You defend her. She participates in family meals." "Mrs. Zelda is an employee, Mom," Henry interrupted, trying to keep calm. "An exceptional employee who has been helping our family heal some wounds. Nothing more." Barbara crossed her arms, incredulous. "And you really believe that? That she's here just as an employee?" "Henry, please. I saw how you interact, how she looks at you and the girls, how you defend her. There's something more happening here." Henry felt his face heat up. He had never thought of Mrs. Zelda that way. She was Mrs. Zelda, a comforting, wise presence who brought balance to his home. But to suggest something romantic, the idea was absurd. "I think you're imagining things, Mom," he said firmly. "Mrs. Zelda is old enough to be my mother." So what? Men marry older women all the time. No one mentioned marriage. Barbara smiled, as if she had just won an argument. So you admit there's something between you? Henry took a deep breath, mentally counting to 10. It was a tactic that Peter always suggested when he was about to lose his patience in court. Mom, please, I'm trying to create a healthier environment for my daughters. After 3 years of suffocating them with rules and control, I finally realized how much I was harming them. Mrs. Zelda has been a great help in this process. That's all it is. Barbara studied her son for long seconds as if trying to decipher a particularly complex enigma. You really believe what you're saying, don't you? She finally asked, with a softer tone. Maybe that's the problem. What problem? You've always been like this, Henry, since childhood. So focused on doing things the right way that you can't see what's happening around you. She sighed, suddenly seeming older. Your father was the same. That's why you two never got along. The mention of his father, who had departed when Henry was only 12, brought a wave of contradictory emotions. Admiration and resentment, love and distance, all mixed in a knot that he had never been able to completely untie. I'm not like my father, he said, with more bitterness than he intended. No? Barbara arched an eyebrow. He also believed he could control everything. He also took refuge in work when emotions became too intense. And he also, she hesitated, also took time to realize what he had right under his nose. Henry frowned, confused. What do you mean? Barbara shook her head as if deciding it wasn't worth continuing that line of thought. Nothing. Just be careful, Henry. Changes are good, but too fast can be dangerous. Especially for Madison and Lily, they've already lost their mother. They can't afford to lose anyone else. With that, she withdrew, leaving Henry alone with turbulent thoughts, and an uncomfortable feeling that his mother, despite being wrong about many things, might be right about others. In the following days, the tension remained palpable. Barbara made veiled comments about external influences and precipitous changes. Henry alternated between defending Mrs. Zelda and trying to appease his mother. The girls, sensitive as always, perceived the charged atmosphere and became quieter, like in the old days. It was Madison who finally broke the impasse in an unexpected way. During a particularly tense lunch, when Barbara was again criticizing the new habits of the house, the girl placed her fork on the plate with a deliberate clink. "Grandma," she said, with a surprisingly firm voice for her 9 years, "why don't you like Mrs. Zelda?" A stunned silence fell over the table. Madison, always the more reserved of the twins, rarely manifested herself in such a direct way. "It's not a matter of liking or not liking, dear," replied Barbara, visibly uncomfortable. I just think certain changes should be more gradual." "But we're happier now," insisted Madison, looking directly at her grandmother. "Me, Lily, and Daddy. Before it was sad here. Everyone pretending everything was okay, but it wasn't." Tears began to shine in the girl's eyes, but she maintained her composure, determined to say what she thought. After Mrs. Zelda arrived, we could talk about Mommy without crying. We could laugh without feeling guilty. We could be children. Lily nodded vigorously, taking her sister's hand in silent support. "And you're trying to ruin everything," Madison completed, with the brutal honesty that only a child could have. Barbara paled as if she had been slapped. She looked at her granddaughter, then at Mrs. Zelda, who observed the scene in respectful silence, and finally at Henry, who seemed as surprised as everyone with his daughter's outburst. "Is that what you think, Madison?" asked Barbara with a trembling voice. "That I'm trying to ruin your happiness?" "It's not what I think," replied the girl, with surprising maturity. "It's what's happening." The silence that followed had a different weight. It was no longer the tension of an imminent conflict, but the density of an uncomfortable truth exposed by innocent eyes. Barbara rose abruptly, murmuring an apology, and left the dining room. Henry, divided between following his mother and remaining with his daughters, opted for the latter, enveloping Madison in a protective hug. "It's okay," he whispered in his daughter's ear. "You were very brave." "Will Grandma be angry with me?" asked the girl with a choked voice. "No, sweetheart, she just needs time to think. Sometimes adults need that." Later, after the girls withdrew to play in the garden under Mrs. Zelda's supervision, Henry found his mother on the porch, contemplating Boston's horizon with a cup of tea in her hands. "She's right, isn't she?" asked Barbara, without turning around. "I'm trying to ruin everything." Henry sat beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I think you're worried, and you have every right to be. A lot has changed in a short time." Barbara turned to him with teary eyes, a rare sight for a woman who had always prided herself on her self-control. "It's not just that, Henry. It's that, for 3 years, I tried to help. I tried to tell you that you were isolating the girls too much, that you were being excessively controlling. And you pushed me away. You told me I didn't understand, that I was interfering too much." She paused, taking a deep breath. And then, suddenly, this woman appears, practically a stranger, and achieves in weeks what I couldn't achieve in years. How do you think I feel? Her mother's raw honesty caught Henry off guard. He had never considered the situation from that perspective. "Mom, He hesitated, seeking the right words. "I think I wasn't ready before. I needed to hit rock bottom, to realize how much I was harming my daughters. And Mrs. Zelda, well, she has a special way. She doesn't judge, she just shows paths." "Like Anna used to do," observed Barbara with a sad smile. "Yes, in a way. But not as a substitute, Mom." "Never as a substitute." Barbara nodded slowly, absorbing her son's words. "You know what irritates me the most?" she said after a moment. "It's that I like her, that lady. She has presence, dignity, and clearly loves your daughters." Henry smiled, surprised by the admission. "She has that effect on people." Barbara sighed, placing her hand over her son's. "Just promise me one thing, Henry." "Promise what?" "Go slow with all these changes, with this emotional opening. Not for me, but for you and the girls. The 3 of you have spent so much time containing everything that, now that the floodgates are open, there's a risk of being swept away by the current." Henry nodded, understanding the wisdom behind his mother's advice despite her awkward way of expressing it. "I promise, Mum, we're learning together, one day at a time." That night, when everyone had already retired, Henry found Mrs. Zelda in the kitchen preparing some kind of aromatic tea. "Your mother and Madison finally talked," she commented without turning around. "It was a beautiful conversation, full of apologies and promises." "How do you know?" asked Henry, surprised. Mrs. Zelda smiled, her eyes shining with wisdom. "The walls have ears, Mr. Anderson, and this house, after so much silence, seems eager to fill itself with honest conversations." Henry nodded, understanding. There was much more happening under his roof than he could ever control. And for the first time in a long time, that no longer frightened him. The end of school vacation was approaching, and with it, Mrs. Barbara's departure. The last days of her stay were marked by a silent truce, not exactly peace, but a tacit understanding that the twins' well-being came above any disagreement between the adults. Barbara still cast evaluative looks at Mrs. Zelda, but now there was more curiosity than antagonism in them. On the eve of her departure, while the girls were sleeping, Barbara surprised everyone by inviting Mrs. Zelda for a private conversation on the porch. Henry, trying to respect their space, remained in the library, but couldn't avoid the apprehension. His mother and Mrs. Zelda were forces of nature in their own way. What would happen when they were alone? On the porch, the 2 women sat in silence for a few moments, observing Boston's lights that sparkled under the starry sky. "You changed my son," Barbara finally said without preamble. "In a few weeks, you achieved what I tried to do for 3 years." Mrs. Zelda smiled without a trace of triumph in her expression. "It wasn't I who changed him, Mrs. Barbara. He was ready to change. He just needed a little nudge." "A little nudge?" repeated Barbara with a slight ironic smile. "It's a gentle way to describe what happened here." She paused, taking a sip of her tea. "You know you can't stay forever, right?" Mrs. Zelda nodded without surprise. "Of course I know. That was never the intention. "So what is your intention exactly?" asked Barbara, with the sharp tone she used in business. "What do you want from this family?" Mrs. Zelda wasn't offended by the direct question. On the contrary, she seemed to appreciate it. "I want the same thing you do, Mrs. Barbara. I want them to heal, to learn to live without Anna but with her memory, for those girls to grow up healthy, knowing they are loved, and for Henry to find peace." Barbara studied her for a long time, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex code. "You don't have family? Children? Grandchildren?" A flash of pain crossed Mrs. Zelda's serene face, so fast it almost went unnoticed. "I had a son, Joshua. He passed away many years ago." Barbara nodded, understanding without the need for more explanations. "And your husband? He's gone too, almost 20 years ago. So you're alone?" Mrs. Zelda smiled with a serenity that disconcerted Barbara. "We're never really alone, Mrs. Barbara. I have my nephews, my community, and I've had the privilege of caring for many children over the years. Each one of them carries a little piece of me, just as I carry a little piece of them." Barbara evaluated her again, now with a new respect in her gaze. "You know, I don't believe in coincidences," she finally said. "When I heard that a stranger had entered my sons' and granddaughters' lives, I suspected everything. I thought you were an opportunist, perhaps even someone with romantic designs on Henry." She paused. "But now, looking at you, I begin to think that maybe you were sent." "Sent?" Mrs. Zelda raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "By Anna," completed Barbara, with a slightly choked voice. "She was like that, you know. Always finding exactly the right person to solve a problem. Even after departing, I feel that she still takes care of this family, in her own way." Mrs. Zelda smiled, without confirming or denying Barbara's theory. "Anna must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was," confirmed Barbara, with tears in her eyes that she quickly wiped away. "And those girls are becoming more and more like her, not just physically, but in spirit, especially now that they're being allowed to simply be." The two women remained in silence for a few moments, united by a mutual understanding that transcended words. Finally, Barbara extended her hand to Mrs. Zelda. "Thank you," she said simply, "for taking care of them when I couldn't." Mrs. Zelda accepted the offered hand, sealing a silent alliance that Henry, discreetly observing from the library, Dorit would never have predicted. The next morning, Barbara's farewell was warmer than usual. She hugged her granddaughters for a long time, making them promise they would call every week. She surprised Mrs. Zelda with a brief but meaningful hug, and, when it came to Henry's turn, she held her son's face between her hands, as she used to do when he was little. "I'm proud of you," she said with a rare emotion in her normally controlled voice. "It's not easy to change, Henry. Believe me, I know that better than anyone." Henry felt his throat tighten with the unexpected emotion. "Thank you, Mom," he managed to say, hugging her more tightly than usual. When Barbara's car disappeared around the curve, Henry turned to Mrs. Zelda, curious. "What did you say to my mother last night? She seemed different today." Mrs. Zelda smiled enigmatically. "Nothing she didn't already know, Mr. Anderson. Sometimes we just need to hear from someone, else what our heart already knows." The following weeks brought new changes to the Anderson family. With the return to school, a new routine was established, still organized, as was Henry's nature, but infinitely more flexible than before. The girls were authorized to invite friends to play after school, something unthinkable months ago. They participated in extracurricular activities of their choice. Madison joined the reading club, while Lily discovered a passion for children's theater. Henry also began to change his professional routine. For the first time in his career, he started to refuse cases that required excessive hours, prioritizing being home for dinner with his daughters. Peter, his partner, observed these changes with silent approval, taking care to redistribute responsibilities in the office without making a fuss. On a Thursday afternoon, almost 3 months after Mrs. Zelda's arrival, Henry arrived home earlier than usual. He found the nanny in the garden with the girls, helping them plant flower seedlings in small beds they had prepared together. "Daddy!" exclaimed Lily, running toward him with hands dirty with soil. "Look what we're doing, our very own garden!" Henry smiled, bending down to hug his daughter, without caring about the dirt on his expensive suit. "I see. It's beautiful." "It was Mrs. Zelda's idea," explained Madison, approaching more calmly. "She said each flower will remind us of something special. This yellow one is Mommy," Lily pointed to a sunflower seedling, "because she was bright like the sun. And this purple one is me," continued Madison, indicating a violet, "because I like to stay quiet, observing. This red one is Lily." Mrs. Zelda proceeded, entering the explanation, vibrant and full of energy. "And which one are you, Daddy?" asked Lily, pulling him by the hand closer to the flower beds. Henry looked at Mrs. Zelda, intrigued. "We haven't planted yours yet," she explained with a warm smile. "We were waiting for you to arrive to choose." That small gesture, waiting, for him, including him in the family ritual, touched Henry deeply. 3 months ago, he would have been informed later about any activity, and probably would have responded with a distracted nod while continuing to work. "What do you suggest, Mrs. Zelda?" he asked, genuinely curious. She studied him for a moment, with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see far beyond the surface. "Perhaps a jasmine," she finally suggested. "Strong, resilient, and when it blooms, it has a fragrance that fills the entire environment." The girls enthusiastically approved the choice, and together, the 4 of them planted the small jasmine in a special bed. There was something deeply symbolic in that simple act, creating roots, preparing to bloom, being part of a larger garden. After the girls went inside to take a bath, Henry remained in the garden with Mrs. Zelda, helping her store the tools. "You have been—" He hesitated, seeking the right words, "a blessing for our family." Mrs. Zelda smiled without false modesty, but also without arrogance. "You and your daughters already had everything you needed within you. I just helped remove some obstacles. Even so, I want you to know how grateful I am." She nodded, accepting the thanks. Then, with a more serious tone, she added, "Mr. Anderson, we need to talk about something important." Henry felt a sudden apprehension. "Is there a problem with the girls?" No, she quickly reassured him. "The girls are beautifully blooming. It's about at my stay here." Henry frowned, confused. "Are you dissatisfied with something? The salary? The working conditions?" Mrs. Zelda shook her head with a patient smile. "It's not about that. It's about the purpose of my presence. When I arrived, this family needed help to find a new balance, to learn to talk about Anna without falling apart, to rediscover the joy of living." "And we still need it," Henry interrupted, feeling an inexplicable panic grow in his chest. "Not in the same way," she replied gently. "You don't realize it. But you've already taken enormous steps. Your daughters are more emotionally secure, more open, and you—" She smiled. "You've learned to be a father again." "Are you resigning?" he finally asked, verbalizing the fear that was growing inside him. "I'm suggesting a transition," she corrected softly. "Not all at once, but gradually. Perhaps start by reducing my days. Give space for you to take on more direct responsibilities, for the girls to develop more independence." Henry felt simultaneously terrified and moved by the wisdom of this extraordinary woman. She was right, of course. From the beginning, she had made it clear that her presence wouldn't be permanent, that her goal was to help them find their own path, not to become indispensable. "I'm afraid," he finally admitted, with an honesty that would have been unthinkable months ago, afraid of not being able to do it alone. "You're not alone," Mrs. Zelda reminded him. "You have your daughters. You have your friend Peter, your mother at a distance, and you'll always have a little bit of me here." She lightly touched his chest over his heart. "In the lessons we learned together." That night, after putting the girls to bed, a ritual that now included stories, good-night kisses, and conversations about the day, Henry remained at the edge of Madison's bed, watching his daughters fall asleep. Lily was already breathing deeply, but Madison still fought against sleep as always. "Daddy," she whispered sleepily, "is Mrs. Zelda leaving?" Henry felt a tightness in his chest. Children always knew somehow. "Not all at once, sweetheart," he replied, stroking her hair. "But yes, eventually she will have to go her own way." Madison nodded, as if she had already expected this answer. "Are you sad?" she asked, with the sharp perception that had always characterized her. Henry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "A little," he admitted, "but I'm also grateful and confident that we'll be okay." "I think so too," agreed Madison, with a wisdom that went far beyond her 9 years. "Mommy would be proud of us." "She would," agreed Henry, feeling tears burn in his eyes, but without shame of them this time. "Very proud." In the following weeks, as Mrs. Zelda had suggested, a gradual transition began. She started coming only 3 days a week, then 2. Henry reorganized his schedule to be home on the other days, discovering, to his surprise, that he was perfectly capable of balancing work and parenthood when he allowed himself to prioritize what really mattered. The girls, initially apprehensive about the change, adapted with the surprising resilience of childhood. Mrs. Zelda's less constant presence made their days together even more special. And on the days when she wasn't there, the lessons she had taught remained, in the recipes she had left written down, in the stories she had told, in the simple but meaningful traditions she had established. On a Sunday afternoon, 6 months after Mrs. Zelda's arrival at the Anderson mansion, the family held a small event in the garden. It wasn't a formal occasion, just an outdoor lunch with the presence of Peter, his wife Teresa, and their twin sons, honorary cousins of Madison and Lily, whom they rarely saw before. Mrs. Barbara also came from Old Harbor, especially for the occasion, bringing her famous cinnamon rolls and a remarkably more relaxed attitude. The garden, planted months before, was beautifully blooming. Henry's jasmine was beginning to show its first buds, Anna's sunflowers were tall and vigorous, and the girls' flowers added color and life to the previously sterile space. In the center of the improvised table under the large maple tree, a small plaque made by the twins announced, "Thank you, Mrs. Zelda." It was a farewell party, not definitive, but marking the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Mrs. Zelda, visibly moved, but maintaining the serene dignity that characterized her, observed the scene with evident satisfaction. The transformation was complete. Where before there was a silent house controlled by fear and rigidity, now there was life, movement, noise, the healthy noise of a family finding its way. "It's not a goodbye," explained Henry to his daughters, when the time came for farewells. "Mrs. Zelda will continue to visit us, and we can visit her too." "Every Sunday," insisted Lily, holding the lady's hand tightly as if fearing she might disappear. "Not every Sunday, dear," Mrs. Zelda gently corrected, "but many Sundays, yes, and you'll always know where to find me." Madison, always more reserved, approached with something in her hands, a small notebook, different from the one that had revealed her feelings months ago. "I made this for you," she said, handing it over with shyness. "They're drawings of all of us, so you won't forget." Mrs. Zelda accepted the gift with reverence, carefully leafing through it. Each page contained a meticulous drawing of the Anderson family at different moments, cooking together, reading in the garden, planting flowers. And in each scene Mrs. Zelda was present, a maternal figure who had brought light to the darkness. "I could never forget," she assured, hugging the girl. "You are here," she touched her own heart, "forever." When she finally departed, after emotional hugs and promises of reunions, Henry accompanied her to the gate. For a moment they remained in silence, contemplating the path traveled. "When you arrived," he finally said, "I told you not to touch my daughters." Mrs. Zelda smiled, remembering, and I replied that children need touch like plants need water. "You were right, about that and about so many other things." Henry paused, seeking the right words. "You know, I never asked what you replied that first day, when I said not to touch my daughters." Mrs. Zelda studied him for a moment, with that gaze that seemed to see the soul. "I said, Mr. Anderson, true touch isn't just physical. It's being present. It's listening. It's allowing the other to be who they truly are. And that's something I promised to do for your daughters with or without your permission." Henry felt a shiver run down his spine. Those words, spoken 6 months ago, had been the beginning of everything, the first brick removed from the wall he had built around his family. "Thank you," he said simply, extending his hand. "For everything." Mrs. Zelda ignored the extended hand and, to Henry's surprise, hugged him firmly. It was a maternal hug, comforting, the kind of hug he hadn't received since childhood. "You are a good father, Henry Anderson," she said, using his first name for the first time. "You always were, you just needed to remember that." Watching her depart, Henry didn't feel the emptiness he had feared. In its place there was a feeling of completeness, of a closed circle. Mrs. Zelda had entered their lives like a force of nature, unexpected, powerful, transformative. And now, having fulfilled her purpose, she withdrew with the same dignity with which she had arrived. Returning to the garden, he found Madison and Lily still looking at the gate, as if expecting Mrs. Zelda to change her mind and return. "She will come back, won't she, Daddy?" asked Lily with teary eyes. "She will, sweetheart," he assured, kneeling to be at his daughter's height. "But even when she's not here physically, she will be present in everything she taught us." "Like Mommy," observed Madison, with her usual perceptiveness. "Exactly like Mommy," agreed Henry, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "Some people never leave us completely. They remain in every laugh, in every recipe, in every flower we plant." That night, after all the guests had left, Henry sat on the porch with a glass of wine, contemplating Boston's starry sky. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful, comfortable, occasionally broken by the soft sounds of the girls sleeping. He took a photograph of Anna that he now always kept nearby, no longer hidden, no longer too painful to look at, but an integrated part of his life. "I think we're doing well, my love," he whispered to the image of his smiling wife. "It's not perfect. It never will be without you. But we're finding our way." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves in the garden, bringing the delicate fragrance of the jasmine that was beginning to bloom. Henry breathed deeply, allowing himself to fully feel the longing that would never completely disappear, but also the gratitude for the present, the hope for the future. The fortress he had built after losing Anna had transformed. It was no longer a prison of rigid rules and constant fear, but a home. Imperfect, sometimes messy, but full of love. A place where two girls could grow up knowing they were unconditionally loved. A place where a man broken by loss could finally begin to rebuild himself. And all this because of a Monday morning when the intercom rang and a serene voice announced, "My name is Zelda Sullivan. I was sent by the agency to replace Vera. Some people enter our lives briefly, but leave eternal marks. Like stones thrown into a lake, their waves continue to expand long after they have disappeared from view. Mrs. Zelda was one of those people, an angel without wings, a silent messenger, a master in the art of healing hearts. And the Anderson family, once fragmented by pain, now moved forward united, not perfect, not without scars, but complete in their own way. Together,